Kieran Oakes juggled his keys, a bag of groceries, and his phone while trying to unlock the door to his apartment, already running 15 minutes behind schedule. He shared the place with Nyla, a quiet grad student he'd met through a housing board 6 months ago. She was the ideal roommate, paid rent on time, kept to herself, occasionally made incredible food from recipes she claimed were family traditions from back home. Kieran had never been entirely sure where back home was. Nyla deflected questions with vague references to a small country you wouldn't have heard of. Today he was distracted by a work crisis, and he barreled into the apartment calling out an apology about being late. He headed straight for the bathroom to shower before a client meeting, completely forgetting Nyla had mentioned being home early today. He pushed open the bathroom door. They'd been meaning to fix the broken lock for weeks and froze. Nyla stood in front of the mirror, but she wasn't what he'd been seeing for 6 months. Her skin wasn't warm brown, but rather an opalescent shimmer shifting through subtle colors. Her ears, usually hidden beneath her hair, were long and curved back from her temples. Her eyes, normally dark brown, were bright amber with moving flecks like constellations. And there was something else, a faint luminescence around her, like she generated her own light. For a frozen moment they stared at each other. Then Nyla's expression crumbled into something that looked like grief and resignation. She didn't try to hide what she was, didn't scramble for excuses. Instead she said quietly, "I suppose this was inevitable. Please close the door. We need to talk." Kieran, mind reeling, backed out and closed the door. His hands were shaking. 5 minutes later Nyla emerged looking like her usual self, human skin, hidden ears, dark eyes, but Kieran couldn't unsee what he'd glimpsed. She sat across from him at their small kitchen table and said simply, "I'm Calthier. We've been living among humans for decades, studying you. I was assigned to this city 3 years ago. You weren't supposed to know." Nyla explained with the calm of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times but never expected to have it. The Calthier had been on Earth since the 1990s, hidden in plain sight using biological camouflage technology that made them appear human. They were observers, sent by a galactic coalition to determine if humanity was ready for first contact. The decision criteria were complex: technological development, social cohesion, capacity for peaceful coexistence with other species. Nyla's specific assignment was to embed in everyday human life, study interpersonal dynamics, economic systems, cultural values. Living with Kieran as a roommate gave her unparalleled access to mundane human behavior that official channels couldn't observe. Kieran processed this with a mix of shock and betrayal. "So our entire friendship has been what? A research project?" Nyla's expression flickered with something genuinely pained. "It started that way. But you've been kind to me in ways my mission didn't account for. You respected my privacy, shared your food when I was low on funds, listened when I was stressed about my supposed grad program. You treated me like a person, not a data point." She admitted that she'd submitted reports on him, his habits, his values, his responses to stress and kindness. But over time the reports became harder to write. She started caring about his opinion, his well-being, in ways that compromised her objectivity. Now that he knew her secret, protocol demanded she report the breach to her superiors. They'd likely relocate her, possibly memory wipe Kieran to protect the mission. But there was another option. Kieran could keep the secret. If he did, Nyla could remain, continue her assignment, and file reports that influenced whether humanity got invited into the galactic community or left isolated for another century. Kieran asked what she wanted. Nyla hesitated, then admitted, "I want to stay, not just for the mission. I've been lying about what I am, but everything else, the friendship, the trust, that was real. And I'm terrified you'll hate me for the deception." Kieran took a day to process. He walked the city, thought about the 6 months living with Nyla, all the small moments that felt genuine, her terrible jokes, her patient explanations when he was learning to cook, The way she'd leave post-it notes with encouraging messages when she knew he had tough days. None of that felt like research. It felt like friendship. When he returned to the apartment, he told Nyla his decision. He'd keep the secret, but on one condition. He wanted honesty. No more lies about where she was from or what she was doing. If they were going to be roommates, they were going to be real roommates. Nyla agreed, relief evident in her posture. Over following weeks, their dynamic shifted. Nyla started showing him her true form occasionally when they were alone, explaining aspects of Kael'thir culture he'd never have understood otherwise. She taught him to read the color shifts in her skin: gold for happiness, violet for curiosity, copper for affection. Kieran shared more about his own life, including struggles with family expectations and career uncertainty he'd never admitted before. One evening, Nyla confessed something that changed the stakes. Her mission was nearly complete. In 3 months, she needed to submit her final assessment about whether humanity was ready for contact. Her superiors would make decisions affecting billions based largely on her recommendations. The problem was her findings were conflicted. Humanity was violent, fractured, often cruel to those perceived as different. But humanity was also capable of extraordinary kindness, creativity, and growth. She'd seen both in Kieran, his initial anger at deception, but also his choice to trust anyway. Kieran asked what she'd recommend. Nyla admitted she didn't know. The safer choice was recommending continued isolation. Humanity wasn't ready and contact could be catastrophic. But isolation meant abandoning humans to solve galactic-scale problems alone: climate change, resource scarcity, existential threats that first contact could help address. And personally, isolation meant other Kael'thir would never experience what she had: genuine friendship with humans built on trust rather than observation. Kieran suggested something radical. What if she recommended limited contact? Not full integration, but careful introduction, starting with people who'd proven they could handle the truth. Like him. Nyla considered this. It wasn't standard protocol, but it might be the compromise that honored both caution and potential. She decided to include Kieran's reaction in her final report. The fact that a human confronted with undeniable proof of alien life chose acceptance over fear. Over the next months, as Nyla prepared her assessment, their friendship deepened into something neither quite had words for. Not romance exactly, but profound, built on understanding that they'd seen each other's true forms, literal and metaphorical, and chosen to stay anyway. When Nyla submitted her report, she recommended a phased approach: select humans notified and invited into dialogue, with broader contact contingent on how initial relationships developed. She cited Kieran's response as evidence that humans were capable of adapting to paradigm-shifting revelations with grace. 3 months later, Kieran received a formal invitation to a cultural exchange summit that he knew was first contact. As he prepared to leave, Nyla, still his roommate, now openly in her true form when they were home, told him she'd been reassigned as liaison for the contact program. She'd be working with the first humans brought into the fold. Including him, Kieran grinned. So we'll still be roommates, just with worse commutes. Nyla's skin flushed gold and she laughed, something like that. Except now when you walk in on me, you'll know what you're seeing. I always knew what I was seeing, Kieran said quietly. A friend who was scared I'd reject her. I'm glad I didn't. As they headed to the summit together, Kieran reflected on the absurdity. He'd accidentally walked in on his roommate in the bathroom and discovered alien life. Instead of panic or betrayal ending things,